In a recent interview, Donald Trump took aim at Amazon founder Jeff Bezos, mocking the multi-billionaire for pocketing a massive $5 billion in tax relief, move he called outrageous. The former president used the moment to paint Bezos as the symbol of elite corruption and Washington favoritism. It was clear this was more than just another political jab. It was a calculated move, designed to stir his base, to target the elite billionaire class, and to put one of his longtime adversaries right back in the crosshairs. Jeff Bezos has always been a favorite target of Trump, not only because of his immense wealth and influence through Amazon but also due to his ownership of the Washington Post. The crowd roared with approval as Trump painted Bezos as a tax cheat and corporate villain, exploiting the American taxpayer while the working class gets crumbs. But just when it seemed Trump had the last word, Representative Jasmine Crockett, never one to shy away from confrontation, fired back with a devastating 9-word rebuttal that not only stunned the crowd but also shifted the narrative completely. What were those 9 words that turned the tables? And how did they silence one of the loudest voices in American politics? Stay with us as we unravel this high-voltage showdown that left the nation talking. As Trump's rant escalated, he cited the massive tax benefits Amazon had received, accusing the company of siphoning public money and contributing nothing in return. He riled up his audience with rhetoric meant to inflame. Bezos walks away with $5 billion of your money while you're out here deciding between rent and groceries. He pointed fingers at government officials, painted pictures of backroom deals, and rallied cries of economic injustice, all while conveniently ignoring his own administration's role in shaping the very tax policies that made these deals possible. It wasn't just a deflection, it was a carefully constructed illusion. Trump was orchestrating a classic misdirection play, hoping that by the time the dust settled, no one would look back at who handed Bezos the keys in the first place. But politics has a way of unraveling the moment someone decides to speak plainly. And that someone turned out to be Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett. Jasmine Crockett's entrance into this national conversation didn't come with dramatic fanfare. It wasn't a choreographed performance or a rehearsed speech. Instead, it was a single sentence, 9 words spoken with quiet confidence and brutal clarity that cut through the cacophony like a knife. You gave him the break. Now blame yourself, Don. The phrase hit the airwaves during a live televised political panel, and the reaction was immediate and visceral. Viewers across the country paused. Pundits stammered. Hosts blinked in disbelief. What had been a Trump-dominated narrative suddenly shifted. Crockett had pulled the curtain back and forced the nation to look not at Bezos or Amazon, but at the architect of the system that allowed such tax advantages to flourish, Donald J. Trump himself. It was a stunning political moment, not just because of its impact, but because of how efficiently it dismantled a false narrative and replaced it with a much harder truth. Social media exploded within seconds. Memes, retweets, and hashtags flooded platforms like wildfire. People weren't just amused, they were grateful. At a time when many politicians skirt the truth or bury it beneath layers of spin, Crockett had delivered an unvarnished reality with surgical precision. Her words became a rallying cry not just against hypocrisy but in favor of transparency and accountability. Political commentators across the spectrum, liberals, moderates, even some conservatives, acknowledged the weight of her words. The clip replayed on cable news loops, late-night comedy shows, and TikTok compilations. Crockett had gone viral, not for theatrics, but for stating a fact that had been largely ignored in the rush to demonize Bezos. But what exactly was she referencing? To understand the full force of her comment, you have to rewind to Trump's tax policy history. The Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017, championed and signed into law by Trump, slashed corporate tax rates from 35% to 21%. Among other incentives designed to boost corporate investment. The logic, according to the administration, was that if corporations kept more of their money, they would reinvest it in the economy, create jobs, and raise wages. But what happened instead was a surge in stock buybacks, executive bonuses, and yes, strategic tax avoidance by some of the wealthiest companies in the world, Amazon chief among them. That bill was a gift-wrapped invitation for corporations to optimize their tax strategies to levels never before imagined. And for Trump to now attack Bezos for playing by the rules he helped write was not just disingenuous, it was laughably hypocritical. Crockett's 9-word response encapsulated all of this. She didn't need to give a policy lecture or hold up a chart. The brilliance of her comment was that it required Trump's own history to prove her point. Every time he tried to shift blame, his own legislative legacy stood in the way. Every time he railed against the wealthy exploiting tax laws, Crockett's words echoed louder in the public consciousness. The narrative battle had turned, and Trump found himself suddenly on defense, trying to explain why his economic policies had benefited billionaires if he supposedly stood with the working class. He tried to recast his past as misunderstood, painting himself as someone who had always fought for the little guy. But Crockett had already rendered those claims hollow. The facts were too clear, and the optics were devastating. In the days following her statement, Crockett continued to lean into the message. She didn't let the conversation fade away. Instead, she reminded the public that tax breaks like the one Bezos received weren't isolated incidents, they were systemic. They were built into the very framework of American fiscal policy, often under the guise of job creation or economic stimulation, but rarely with any meaningful accountability. She pointed out how cities and states, desperate for investment and underfunded due to years of austerity, were coerced into giving away billions to companies that, more often than not, automated jobs or outsourced labor. Crockett began calling for a re-evaluation of corporate welfare across the board, arguing that if billion-dollar corporations could receive tax holidays, then working-class families should at the very least receive fair wages, affordable housing, and accessible healthcare. Meanwhile, Trump's team scrambled to control the fallout. They released statements suggesting that the $5 billion figure was exaggerated, that the tax incentives in question were negotiated at the state level, not federal, and that Trump had nothing to do with them. But these arguments rang hollow, especially to those who remembered Trump's aggressive push for lower corporate taxes and his boasts about deregulation during his presidency. The reality was, Trump had spent years championing policies that made it easier for corporations like Amazon to thrive without proportionate contribution. And now, confronted by the consequences of his actions, he was trying to shift blame onto those who had merely taken advantage of the playground he'd helped build. Jasmine Crockett's refusal to let that happen was a powerful reminder of why she's become a rising star in Democratic politics. Her blend of clarity, courage, and command of the facts makes her a formidable opponent to the disinformation and deflection tactics that dominate so much of political discourse today. What she accomplished in a single sentence was not just a rebuttal, it was a reframing of the national conversation. She reminded the public that outrage without accountability is empty, and that politicians must be judged not only by what they say, but by what they've done. Trump's attempts to posture as an outsider fighting the system were exposed for what they truly were, a performance by someone who had been at the helm and turned the gears himself. As more Americans began to revisit the details of Trump's economic policies, the conversation broadened. Questions arose about the fairness of the tax system, the role of wealth in politics, and how corporations manage to secure massive incentives while wages stagnate and public services erode. Crockett's challenge had become more than a moment, it had become a movement of thought, pushing both politicians and citizens to consider who benefits from our policies and who is left behind. It wasn't just about Bezos or Amazon anymore, it was about the soul of the American economic promise. Even among Trump's supporters, there was a ripple of discomfort. Many who cheered his attacks on Bezos began to wrestle with the contradiction that their champion had been instrumental in empowering the very dynamics he now condemned. It became harder to maintain the illusion that Trump was the enemy of the elite when he had spent years feeding them. Crockett's words were a wake-up call to those who wanted to believe Trump could be both a billionaire and a populist, both a system insider and its greatest reformer. The truth, once spoken plainly, has a way of lingering, and her truth lingered like a bell that couldn't be unrung. In the broader scope of American politics, this clash serves as a case study in the power of truth over bluster. Trump brought his signature style of drama, spectacle, and grievance. Crockett brought facts, precision, and integrity, and when the dust settled, it was Crockett's voice that resonated. She didn't just defeat a talking point, she dismantled a narrative. She reminded America that the people still have the power to see through manipulation, to recognize contradictions, and to demand better from those who lead. In a time when accountability often feels elusive, Jasmine Crockett delivered it in under 10 seconds. So what does this mean going forward? For one, it means Trump may need to tread more carefully when invoking economic populism as a weapon. As long as figures like Crockett are around, the truth will be waiting just around the corner, ready to counter his slogans with substance. It also signals a broader awakening among the public, a hunger for leadership that doesn't just talk tough but walks the walk. Voters are paying closer attention, asking sharper questions, and demanding that their leaders be held to their own standards. In the end, the episode reminds us that political theater can be powerful, but it's no match for honest accountability. Trump humiliated Jeff Bezos in front of a national audience until Jasmine Crockett reminded everyone that the emperor's robe was stitched with his own legislation. She didn't need a filibuster or a fiery speech, just 9 words that exposed hypocrisy, elevated truth, and inspired a nation to look past the noise and into the mirror. If you enjoyed this deep dive and want to hear more truth-telling moments that challenge the noise and uplift clarity, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us keep these stories alive and ensure the truth is never silenced by bluster.